What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I am welcoming back to the show Justin Richards. Welcome, my friend.
What is up, fam? Good to
And
see you.
I'm excited to have you back on. You've been on the show a couple times. Early on, just talking about Finger Guns, still one of my favorite
Hey,
books. You and Val created a wonderful work of art there.
thank
And
you.
you and Val are back again with a new project, The Slasher's Apprentice from Mad Cave Studios. And I want to hop into all things about this comic, but I feel like chances are we might have some new listeners that haven't gotten to know who you are or kind of heard how you got into creating. So I always like to start out asking my guests, have you always had a love for comics, or like is this something that kind of came later in life?
Um, I would argue it came later in life for me.
Okay.
I definitely had a couple of comic books here and there as a kid, but it was never like my thing as a child. When I was in my gosh, how old am I now? When I was in my like late 20s or so, I moved out to a new town and was just kind of looking for something to do and decided to check out this random comic shop, and the rest was kind of history from there. I bought a few things and then came back the next week, and then eventually the owner of that store was starting a podcast and was like, "Hey, you seem pretty into this and pretty knowledgeable. What do you think? You want to do that?" And then, yeah, just kind of kept going.
So you came later in life, you found this love for comics. Where was this then, like as you are getting into this hobby of reading comics and discovering this wonderful world, where was it for you that you said, okay, I want to dip my toe into the creative side, the creative process?
Yeah. So after I did that with the podcast stuff, I did interviews and reviews for about 3 years. And in that time, I got a lot of behind the curtain looks at how comics are made, and talked to a lot of editors and writers and artists and letterers, all of the above. Uh, and just kind of was fascinated by it. And I've always liked writing. I wrote poetry a bunch in high school and stuff, and so I've liked writing, and just was like, maybe I'll take my shot at it, and kind of hit that shot, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And so, like I mentioned earlier, you had finger guns, something that I loved. And now you're coming out with this new project, The Slasher's Apprentice. Tell me about this. If someone hasn't gotten to check it out yet, what's the elevator pitch for this comic?
Yeah, so the Slasher's Apprentice is my and Val's homage, or really our love letter, to slasher horror. It's about a girl named Riley, excuse me, who experiences a very traumatic event as a child, and she grows up obsessed with slasher killers and blackmails her way into being the apprentice for a local legend that she's a big fan of.
So good. And Val is back with you again, teaming up. How was that kind of collaboration coming back into the saddle of creating comics together?
Oh, it was really awesome. It was like a well-oiled machine coming back, and because I brought Val in on the process of this book really early. Finger Guns was originally pitched without an artist attached,
Okay.
and I had just kind of met Val at that time and thought he was a good fit, and it worked out, and it was great. This time around, we've been buds for 5 years and watching horror films together throughout the whole pandemic. So, um, I know how much Val loves horror. He's probably one of the few people that loves it more than I do. And so I just wanted to bring him in, and so we actually co-wrote this book together. It was kind of like I brought him the pitch and was like, "What do you think? Is this cool?" And he was like, "Yeah." And then kind of just bounced ideas, and I sketched it, or not sketch, but like wrote everything out and then pitched it, and here we are.
So something like this, like you said, this is a love letter, and after getting to check out this first issue, that's what it feels like, and it pays a little tribute. You mentioned that you got into comics after you got into the comics. You were doing some podcasting. You're bringing some podcasting into the comic. It's like it's life imitating art, imitating life. There, it feels like.
Could argue that, yeah, yeah. It's a fun full circle. The podcast stuff was it wasn't even originally planned until we got to the scripting stages, and then we were trying to look for a good device that we could use for Riley to do exposition without being exposition-y.
Yeah. Well,
And it just made perfect sense with how big the true crime scene, podcast scene really is these days.
yeah, it feels like that world in the podcasting is blowing up and stuff. And what I like, you said it's a device that you can utilize for telling story here, and you do, right? We get some of Riley's backstory early on via the whole podcast, being done, and I think that's just a really cool writing technique. So where do you, as a process, like kind of figure out, how you want to frame out a story like this and use stuff like that too?
Yeah, a lot of it is done in the outlining
Okay.
stage. The outlining stage for me is like my longest stage in the pitching and writing process. Probably is for most folks, but yeah, it takes me a while because I really like to have it properly mapped out, and it makes scripting way easier when you finally get to that stage. Because like scripting is like refining at that point. It's kind of really an editorial process with just adding in dialogue and details as you go. So that's kind of where I approach it. I kind of give myself the framework during the outline and then allow myself to kind of like tear walls down as I'm going.
Mm. You talk about this as a love letter. Did this idea spawn out of just like watching slasher films one point? I'm like, this I have an idea. Like, how did this kind of idea originate?
Yeah, it mostly did. I love horror movies, watch a ton of them. Val and I, like I said, we spent a lot of the pandemic together watching horror movies, kind of recommending them back and forth and watching them together. And it was very specifically inspired by one of my favorite slasher horrors called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon, which is very meta and very behind the scenes. And that's kind of where I was like, I love what this movie does. That's why it's my favorite. I love that it takes this peek behind the curtain. And if I was going to do a pitch, it would be something along those lines. So I kind of started with that of like, I want to do something that shows, you know, like people moving bodies and cutting power and, uh, plotting out how what we see, what silliness we see in a typical slasher, like how we would do it in real life and like make it real. And so I just thought that was really interesting and kind of went from there of like,
Yeah.
how can I get behind the scenes? Who would be there? I was like, oh, well, like somebody helping out, like an apprentice, like some newbie.
Nice. So you mentioned that Val is co-writing this with you.
Yeah.
How does that affect or change? Did it change your process at all as a writer? Like, have you co-written before? Is this kind of your first foray into it?
I dabbled with playing with co-writing early before I was actually like a professional
Okay.
writer.
Yeah.
Um that's kind of how I was able to get off the ground of like making my butt move and actually write some scripts for Finger Guns before I pitched it. Um but this is the first time I've done it like for real the whole way through.
Mhm.
It didn't affect me too much. Val, we discussed a lot early on about how we wanted to approach the collaboration because we wanted to be very 50-50 on everything. And obviously, somebody drawing the book is like a bit more than 50-50. It takes a lot of work. So I told him, I want to do as much heavy lifting as I can on the writing part while also still letting Val contribute equally. So that's where I did a lot of the outlining and let him give me notes.
Yeah.
But when it came to scripting, we literally just got on a call and did a shared document and just went through the whole thing together. And that definitely changes things because you have an immediate feedback loop where, you can go, is this line of dialogue stupid? Does it sound, unnatural, or is this too cheesy? And it like that part was a lot easier almost,
Mhm.
having that immediate feedback, which was nice. And it was super fun, Val and I just going, well, what's a cool creative way that we could kill somebody in this room that like nobody might think of? So it was a lot of fun. Definitely like different in that, not all the dialogue is my choice, right? Not
Mhm.
every scene, like you have to let go of that ego a bit as a writer and like share the decision making and like like, oh, I might have written this line a little differently, but
Mhm.
that's the point of collaboration, and it
Right.
ends up being really a beautiful thing by the end of it.
Yeah. So since Val's coming on to the writing side, are we going to get to see you eventually come on to the art side of?
If you want a comic full of stick figures, I got you, buddy.
That's your new you can do the Tom King sketches that on blank covers. So
Yeah. Val can attest. Every once in a while, I will be nice enough to draw out like a page or a panel layout that I have in my head that doesn't make sense to him, and it is god awful. It is terrible.
oh, it's so good. Well, I was gonna, I was asked like, because this is you have some intense scenes here of of killing,
Yeah.
and usually when a writer does that, I wonder like the reaction from the artist of like, oh, you want me to do what? Like, how much of that like was Val still like, are we really gonna you really want me to draw this?
Well, that was part of why I brought Val along, is because he loves horror.
Mhm.
That's normally what he draws. Finger Guns was actually kind of a change of pace for Val, and it was very funny to see people compare his art to Archie and him go, "No, I am a horror artist." Uh, so it was really cool to have that, and yeah, no, the best part of collaborating with Val was that the entire time I went, "When you have to draw this, you can't be mad at me."
You're like, it's
you,
you
you
help
did
make
it.
this decision.
Yeah, you helped do it to yourself.
Oh,
So that was really funny. But yeah, Val was very game for, like, that's kind of what he wants.
yeah.
He loves drawing viscera and gore and those things. So pushing that envelope was kind of never a question for the two of us on what we were going to do with our slasher.
Yeah. Well, and then what's I found interesting is mentioned how trying to find creative ways. I'm thinking of the very first issue, and not to go into any spoilers, but you know how people get killed in one area. There literally are like five different ways that they all die, and I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay, I did. Like that's got to be a fun world to get to play in sometimes. To kind of just like, what could we do here? How could we make this more unique or something?
Yeah, that was the funnest part of writing this book, was when we got to a point where it's like, all right, we're about to kill a bunch of college students. How are we going to do it? And it was, we really tried to push the envelope with, nothing too basic. Like, obviously, every once in a while somebody's just going to get stabbed, but if they do, we wanted them stabbed in an interesting way or an interesting place or something to that effect. So everything was thought out very methodically to make you like cringe the most.
Yeah. Do your protagonist in this is a younger character as well. Finger Guns, you had younger characters. Do you gravitate to, having your main people protagonists be younger characters, or is there kind of just like it just is how it falls, in these stories?
I usually try to let things fall how the story feels it
Okay.
needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Uh, that's what I try to aim for. I don't ever go into a story with like, well, this character is definitely 12 years old. It's more just kind of like, what story am I telling, and how, like, what character do I think best suits that?
Right.
But I do also think I tend to gravitate towards younger uh, characters. I think I just relate with the teen struggle more.
Mhm.
I probably just haven't grown up enough. uh, I just, yeah, I find kids fascinating between, how they see the world in such focused lenses, and how they struggle with things that I'm still unpacking as an adult. I feel like a lot of my generation is still doing a lot of that. Not to get too crazy deep or anything, but I feel like that's part of where my brain gravitates towards that struggle.
Yeah. Well, you saw that the struggle, with the kids in Finger Guns, and right off the bat on the Slasher's Apprentice, Riley went through some traumatic stuff as a kid, and how trauma affects you in life. I think that's something that is interesting to see unpacked the way that you all do with this first issue, and I'm sure even more so throughout the series. So like for you, we kind of hit on it a little bit, but like, how do you get into that headspace of someone, like your main character Riley of, dealing with this trauma that then kind of catapults it to where the story takes it?
Yeah, I try to literally, if I'm writing something like that, like a character, I do try to, as much as I can, just think from their shoes, from their
Mhm.
POV. Think, okay, I just saw this. What would I do? Would I, yell and scream and run, or would I crawl up in a ball and hide in a wardrobe? Uh, so that's kind of where I usually try to approach situations with how a character reacts and responds. For Riley in particular, it's such a traumatic event, and her response is technically so super not good that she's not even really a good person that you're really meant to empathize with, like to an extent, of course. But yeah, so we've already had a review of this book, and it said that like it's a world full of like bad people, and I was like, that's very true. That
Yeah.
person nailed that down. uh, which made it really fun to write because it's normally you're trying to win over readers to make them like your character, and in this case it's like, well, she's kind of not likable. Like,
Is that hard? Because I know sometimes, a lot of people like I have a friend who's like, I don't like this TV show because there's no redeemable characters or such and such. How does that make it for you then as a writer? Is it challenging to kind of say like, okay, how can I engage the audience when you aren't rooting for the character?
yeah, I mean, there's still, it's a balance because you want people to identify with or relate to your characters. um I guess horror kind of lets us get away with a bit more of that
Mhm.
because people are here for the violence as much as they are the story. And we still have plenty of story. There's tons of twists and turns, and there's characters that we haven't announced or introduced yet. Um, so there's still a lot to chew on. But yeah, it's been like a balancing act of sorts where we very much established early, like we're not gonna go out of our way to make Riley likable per se. She's just gonna be who she is and do what she's doing because this whole story revolves around Riley's response to her trauma. And I feel like that's where she is relatable, is even though her response is not good, it is a response to something incredibly traumatic, something that most people could never even relate to. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it is. It's interesting to see. And the point you make of, right? Like you can get away with that pretty easy in a horror book because look at everyone cheers for Freddy, everyone cheers for Jason, everyone cheers for
Yep.
these, the killers in these movies. That's why you watch them. That's why you're entertained. Um,
Hmm.
how long is, the story like is it slated for? How many issues? Five.
Five
Okay.
issues. Yeah.
So is this something that like, the story you wanted to tell right off the bat? And then do you kind of have it when you're creating something? Do you give yourself an allowance to say, well, I know I have to tighten up and end the story here, but I can maybe leave the door open if we want to explore the world more. How do you kind of handle that as a writer? Because obviously all those things depend on sales and depends on if you want to tell more, or do you just say, you know what, I don't care about any of that. I'm just writing. This is the story I want, and I don't think about expanding off of in any case.
Yeah. I try never to let like an ending be in my brain before I get to it.
Okay.
But I do, as a hopeful, you always want to leave that little bit of room. I mean, anybody who's read Finger Guns, no spoilers, but they know I left it a little open ended, we'll say.
Hmm.
Left room for to explore more. And with a horror movie, or the slasher horror especially, like you kind of, it's part of the formula practically to leave room for your killers to return, or those kinds of things. So that's definitely how we approached this. Was we kind of always knew that no matter what ending we landed on, there we would probably find a way to you know show a hand popping out of a grave or something crazy where, like, yeah, like, oh, more could come if you love this book.
how did you get connected with Mad Cave, bringing this title to Mad Cave?
Um, as with most things in comics, through a long, convoluted, like, yeah, met during the pandemic. I was in a friend group online where one of them was a member of Mad Cave's team. Uh, met got on to an anthology that they did called Lower Your Sights, which was a benefit uh, book for children in Ukraine. So I was like, heck yeah, I want to be
Yeah,
involved with that. And uh, did that and met Chaz, who works with Mad Cave that way. And when I went to New York Comic Con, he was very kind and said nice things about my story in that anthology, and said he wanted to work together more. So I emailed him, and my stuff got lost in a spam folder for a year, and then he found it and hit me up, and then introduced me to James, who helped edit this book, and the rest was kind of history from there.
yeah, yeah. That great team over there. I love it. So when I saw your name attached to Mad Cave, I was like, yes.
Oh,
Uh, good.
I've had nothing but an amazing time working with Mad Cave. I think they're fantastic. I love the books they're putting out,
Mhm.
and hopefully I get to do a lot more.
Yeah,
We'll see.
for sure. This comes out in mid-April, correct?
Late April.
Late April. Okay.
Yeah, April 30th to be
Okay.
precise.
Nice. See, my dates are all messed up in my head. I don't know what day it is.
Well, if you look, there was a slip up at one point with the previews, like previews book in
Okay.
the previews world page. They had it listed as the 16th, but it is the 30th.
Okay. That's why I always check because I'm like, you know what? Chances are when your book's coming out better than I will,
Sometimes depends on the interview.
right? So I gotta ask, I want to respect your time, but if you're being interviewed by someone who's not really into horror slasher movies,
Mhm.
what movie would you recommend to said interviewer? I'm not saying it's me that doesn't
Right.
like horror slasher movies, but it's me. What movie do I need to see?
Well, I might start with the one I already mentioned, Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. It's a very tame slasher,
Okay.
very, very, there is, obviously there's violence, but it's pretty muted compared to a lot of other typical slashers, and it's more about the meta process and those kinds of things than it is about like just being a slasher movie until because it's a mockumentary and it follows a crew that is following a guy who wants to be a legendary slasher, and he's like setting everything up ahead of time. He's finding who his victims are going to be, who his final girl is, setting up a house and rigging it with all the windows are nailed shut, and the branch here where you could exit from the second thing, like he cuts the branch a little bit so if you put any weight on it it'll break and stuff like that. And like it's a lot of fun, really.
Yeah.
It is. It's kind of funny. There's moments where you'll laugh, and then it helps you kind of break down this silly genre and like what kind of makes it beat at its heart, outside of just an endless killing machine
Right.
that we all want to root for. So I would say that one is a good one. And then I always, as far as like major mainstream franchises go, I love Scream.
Okay.
um, it is also known for being, kind of meta, uh, breaking down tropes and stuff, where somebody will be screaming about how stupid somebody is on the TV for going into a room or for not turning around. And then meanwhile, there's a killer right behind them and they're not turning around, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, I love things that like break it down like that and kind of pull back the curtain and show a little bit of how silly everything is. So,
Perfect. See, I felt like I had to ask since I had you on. So,
nope.
what is there anything that I mean, obviously you're very much into the world of the Slasher's Apprentice. Is there anything that you want to highlight though, still of like that you've written or that we haven't gotten to talk about yet, or that you got coming up?
I mean, we kind of managed to talk through a lot of my bibliography already. Finger Guns is that's my baby. That's my first book, first published work. I love that book And even though it's been 5 years, I still get new readers coming up and asking me when we're doing more because of the messed up ending that I left them with. And uh, no promises or spoilers or anything, but I'm always trying. I'm always talking to Vault just so everybody knows, like, that's it. I want to tell you more of that story. So if you go out and support that book more, maybe someday I'll get to. Uh, but that's kind of, as far as projects go, that's the biggest. I don't have anything super big in the works I can talk about right now. Um, at some point, if you follow me and Val on socials, we're trying to meet up at a con this year. So maybe for the first time ever, people can get Finger Guns and Slasher's Apprentice signed by both of us without having to do some mail trickery. So that'd be fun.
Nice. Well, where can people follow along with you? Stay up to date with what you got coming out and things like that, and con appearances and stuff.
Yeah, both Val and I are on BlueSky mostly. I'm at emo comic writer on everything. Still on Instagram. I really don't post there, but I'm technically there, and occasionally I'll throw something up. Like I did throw something up for the announcement of Slasher's Apprentice. So if I have like a big con, I'll probably put something up there if you're not on BlueSky. And Val is always at Val Hal on most things, so you can find both of us on there. If you find one of us, scroll down a bit, and you'll see us having posted each other's stuff probably. So yeah, that's where it's pretty easy to follow along, and we'll definitely, when we find a con that we can both afford to go to at the same time, that's when we'll post something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, well, Justin, thanks so much again for always just taking some time to talk about comics with me. Again,
My
go
pleasure.
out, support the Slasher's Apprentice, put it on your pull list, talk to your comic shops, go get it, and then also do yourself a favor if you haven't for whatever reason, go pick up Finger Guns. You can get the trade, or there's so many single issues of the beautiful covers too that if you can track down some of those, but get the trade, you're not going to be disappointed. So.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Anytime. So with that being said, gang, go support Slasher's Apprentice and hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.